Chapter 54. The Third Day of Imprisonment. Felton was attracted, but more than this must yet be done. It was necessary to retain him, or rather it was necessary that he should remain of himself, and her ladyship had only an obscure perception of the means by which this result must be achieved. But even more was needed. He must be made to speak that she might answer him, for her ladyship was well aware that her most seductive power was in her voice, which could run skillfully through the whole scale of tones, from mortal speech upwards to the language of heaven. And yet, in spite of all this seduction, her ladyship might fail, for Felton had been forewarned against her, even to the minutest chance. From this time she studied all her actions, all her words, and even her slightest glance and gesture, nay, even her respiration, which might be interpreted as a sigh. In short, she studied everything, like a skillful actress who had just accepted a role which she had never been accustomed to perform. Before Lord de Winter, her behavior was easier to arrange, and she had therefore determined upon that the evening before. To remain silent and dignified in his presence, from time to time to irritate him by affected contempt, or by a disdainful expression, to urge him to menaces and violence, which contrasted so completely with her own perfect resignation. Such was her ladyship's plan. Felton would see this. Perhaps he would say nothing, but at any rate he would see it. In the morning Felton came as usual, but her ladyship allowed him to preside over all the preparations for breakfast, without addressing him. At the very moment that he was about to leave the room, she had a gleam of hope, for she thought that he was really about to speak, but his lips moved without any sound issuing from them, and controlling himself by an effort, he suppressed in his own breast the words which he nearly uttered, and withdrew. About noon, Lord de Winter entered. It was rather a fine summer's day, and a beam of that pale English sun, which enlightens but does not warm, penetrated through the bars of the prison. Her ladyship looked out of the window, and pretended not to have heard the door open. Ah, said Lord de Winter. After having represented comedy and tragedy, we are now doing melodrama. The prisoner did not answer. Yes, continued his lordship, I understand it very well. You would gladly enough be free upon this beach. You would gladly enough in some good ship glide through the waves of that sea, which is as green as an emerald. You would gladly enough, whether on land or on the ocean, concoct against me one of those pretty little plots which you are so dexterous in contriving. Patience. In 4 days you shall be permitted to approach the bench, and the sea will be open to you. More open, perhaps, than you would wish, for in 4 days England will be rid of you. Her ladyship clasped her hands and raised her eyes to heaven. Lord, exclaimed she with an angelic sweetness of gesture and of intonation, forgive this man as I myself forgive him. Yes, pray, accursed creature, exclaimed the Baron. Your prayer is the more generous as you are in the power of a man who I swear will never pardon you. And he left the room. At the moment he went out, a piercing glance through the half-opened door enabled her to perceive Felton, who drew himself quickly back that he might not be seen. She then threw herself upon her knees and began to pray. My God! Thou knowest for what sacred cause I suffer. Give me, therefore, strength to bear my trials. The door opened softly. The beautiful suppliant pretended not to have heard it, and, with a voice almost choked by tears, she continued, O God the Avenger, O God of mercy, wilt thou permit the wicked designs of this man to be accomplished? Then only did she appear to hear the sound of Felton's footsteps, and rising as quickly as thought, she blushed, as though ashamed of being seen upon her knees. I do not like to interrupt those who pray, gravely observed Felton, so do not disturb yourself on my account, I beseech you, madam. How do you know that I was praying, sir? Said her ladyship in a voice suffocated by sobs. You are mistaken, sir, I was not praying. "Do you think, then, madam," replied Felton in his habitual grave voice, but with a gentler accent, "that I assume to myself the right of preventing a fellow creature from throwing herself at the foot of her Creator? God forbid. Besides, repentance is becoming in the guilty, whatever crime they may have committed, and a criminal prostrate before God is sacred in my eyes." "Ay, guilty," replied the lady with a smile which would have disarmed the angel at the day of judgment. "Guilty? Oh, my God, thou knowest what I am. Suppose that I am condemned, sir. Yet you know that God, who loves martyrs, sometimes permits the innocent to be condemned." "Were you condemned, were you innocent, and were you a martyr," replied Felton, "you would have still more reason to pray, and I would myself assist you with my prayers." "Oh, you are a just man," exclaimed her ladyship, throwing herself at his feet. "I can no longer restrain myself, for I fear that my strength will fail me at the moment wherein I must endure the trial, and confess my faith. Listen, then, to the supplication of a woman in despair. They deceive you, sir, but that is not the point. I only ask one favor of you, and if you grant it, I will bless you both in this world and in that which is to come." "Speak to my superior, madam," said Felton. "Fortunately, I have no commission either to pardon or to punish. It is to one higher than me that God has given this responsibility." "To you, no, to you alone. Listen to me rather than contribute to my destruction and my shame." "If you have deserved this disgrace, madam, if you have incurred this ignominy, you should bear it as a sacrifice to God." "What mean your words? Oh, you do not understand me. When I talk of ignominy, you think that I speak of some punishment, of imprisonment, or of execution. Would to God it were so! What care I for death or imprisonment?" "It is I that do not understand you now, madam," said Felton. "Or pretend that you do not understand me," replied the prisoner with a smile of doubt. "No, madam, by the honor of a soldier, by the faith of a Christian." "What? Do you not know the designs which Lord de Winter has against me?" "I do not know them." "Impossible, you are his confidant." "Madam, I never lie." "Oh, but he is too unreserved for you to have failed to guess them." "Madam, I never attempt to guess anything. I always wait for confidence, and except what Lord de Winter has said in your presence, he's told me nothing." "Then," exclaimed the lady with an indescribable accent of truth, "you're not his accomplice? You do not know that he designs for me a disgrace, which all the punishments on earth could not equal in horror?" "You're mistaken, madam," said Felton, colouring. "Lord de Winter is not capable of such a crime." "Good," said the lady to herself. "Without knowing what it is, he calls it a crime." Then she added aloud, "The friend of the wretch is himself capable of anything." "And whom do you call the wretch?" said Felton. "Are there, then, two men in England to whom the term can be applied?" "You mean George Villiers," said Felton. "Whom the pagans, the Gentiles, and the infidels call Duke of Buckingham," resumed her ladyship. "I would not have believed that there was a man in all England who would have required so much explanation to recognize the person to whom I alluded." "The hand of the Lord is stretched over him. He will not escape the punishment that he deserves." Felton only expressed concerning the Duke that sentiment of execration which had been vowed by every Englishman against him, whom Catholics themselves called the tyrant, the extortioner, and the profligate, and whom the Puritans simply termed Satan. "Oh, my God!" exclaimed the lady. "How I beseech thee to inflict upon that man the punishment which is his due. Thou knowest that I seek not the gratification of my own revenge, but that I implore the deliverance of all the people." "Do you know him, then, madam?" inquired Felton. "He questions me at last," said her ladyship to herself, delighted at having so quickly obtained this great result. "Oh, yes, I know him. Oh, yes, to my misfortune, my eternal misfortune," and her ladyship writhed her arms as if in a paroxysm of grief. Felton no doubt felt that his strength was giving away. He made some steps toward the door, but the prisoner, who did not lose sight of him, bounded after him and stopped his progress. "Sir," said she, "be good, be merciful, hear my prayer. That knife of which the fatal prudence of the Baron deprived me, because he knew the use that I should make of it. Oh, hear me to the end. That knife, return it to me only for one instant, for mercy's sake, for pity's sake. I embrace your knees. See, you may shut the door. I do not want to injure you. Oh God, how could I have any design against you? You, the only just and good and compassionate being that I have met with. You, perhaps my preserver. 1 minute the knife. Only 1 minute. I will return it to you through the wicket of the door. Only 1 minute, Mr. Felton, and you will have saved my honor." "To kill yourself?" exclaimed Felton in great terror, and forgetting to withdraw his hands from the hands of his prisoner. "To kill yourself?" "I've said it, sir," murmured the lady, dropping her voice, and sinking exhausted on the floor. "I have divulged my secret. He knows all, and oh my God, I am lost." Felton remained standing, motionless and irresolute. "He still doubts," thought the lady. "I have not been true enough to the character I'm acting." Someone was heard in the corridor, and her ladyship recognized the slow step of Lord de Winter. Felton also recognized it and approached the door. Her ladyship rushed forward. "Oh, not one word," she cried in a concentrated voice. "Tell to that man 1 word of what I have said to you, or I am lost. And it is you. Then, as the steps drew nearer, she was silent, lest her voice should be heard, and merely pressed her beautiful hand on Felton's lips with a gesture of infinite terror. Felton gently repulsed her, and she sank upon a couch. Lord de Winter passed by the door without stopping, and his departing steps were heard in the distance. Felton, pale as a corpse, stood for some moments intently listening. Then, when the sound had entirely ceased, he breathed like a man awakening from a dream and rushed out of the room. "Ah," said her ladyship, as she listened in turn to the sound of Felton's steps, as he retreated in the direction opposite to that of Lord de Winter. "At last, then, you are mine." But instantly her countenance grew dark. "If he should speak to the Baron," said she, "I'm ruined. For the Baron, who well knows that I would not destroy myself, will place me before him with a knife in my hands, and he will at once perceive that all this great despair is but a farce." She went and stood before a glass and gazed upon herself. Never had she been more beautiful. "Oh, yes," she said, smiling, "but he will not tell him." In the evening, Lord de Winter came in when the supper was served. "Sir," said her ladyship to him, "is your presence to be a compulsory aggravation of my imprisonment, and cannot you spare me that additional torture which your visits cause me?" "Why, my dear sister," said the Baron, "did you not sentimentally announce to me with that pretty mouth, which is today so cruel, that you came to England for the sole purpose of seeing me without restraint? A pleasure of which you told me you felt the loss so strongly that you had, for it, risked sea-sickness, storms, and captivity. Well, here I am, and you ought to be satisfied. But besides, I have a particular reason for my visit this time." Her ladyship shuddered, for she thought that Felton had spoken. Never, perhaps, in her whole life had this woman, who had experienced so many strong and opposite emotions, felt so violent a beating of her heart. She was sitting down. Lord de Winter took a chair, drew it to her side, and seated himself upon it, and he produced a paper from his pocket, which he slowly unfolded. "Here," said he, "I wished to show you the sort of passport which I have myself drawn up, and which will serve as a kind of warrant in the life which I permit you to lead." Then, directing her ladyship's eyes to the paper, he read, "Order to convey to—" "The name is left blank," said the Baron. "If you have any preference, you will let me know, and provided it be 1,000 leagues from London, your request shall be granted. So I resume. Order to convey to Charlotte Backson, branded by the justice of the kingdom of France, but liberated after punishment. She will reside in that place without ever giving more than 3 leagues from it. In any case of an attempt to escape, she is to be put to death. She will be allowed 5 shillings a day for her lodging and board. This warrant does not concern me, said her ladyship coldly, since a name is inserted in it which is not mine. A name, and have you one? I have that of your brother. You make a mistake. My brother was only your second husband, and your first is still alive. Tell me his name, and I will insert it instead of Charlotte Backson. No, you will not. You're silent. Very well, you shall be registered under the name of Charlotte Backson. Her ladyship remained silent, now not from artifice, but from fear. She believed that the warrant was to be immediately executed. She thought that Lord de Winter had hurried forward her departure. She suspected even that she was to go that very evening. For an instant, therefore, she imagined that all hope was gone, when all of a sudden she perceived that the warrant had no signature. The joy she experienced at this discovery was so great that she was unable to conceal it. Yes, said Lord de Winter, who saw what was passing in her mind. Yes, you are looking for the signature, and you say to yourself, all is not lost, since the warrant is not signed. He shows it to me to frighten me, that is all. But you deceive yourself. This warrant will be sent tomorrow to the Duke of Buckingham. On the day after, it will be returned, signed by his hand and sealed with his seal. And 24 hours after that, I answer for it that the execution of it shall have begun. Adieu, madam. That is all I have to say to you. And I reply to you, sir, that this abuse of power, this banishment under a false name, are infamous. Would your ladyship prefer being hanged under your true name? You know that the English laws are inexorable concerning the abuse of the marriage contract. Explain yourself freely. Although my name, or rather my brother's, is mixed up in all this, I will risk the scandal of a public trial to be sure of my aim in getting rid of you. Her ladyship made no answer, but she became as pale as a lifeless form. Oh, I see you would rather travel. Very well, madam. There is a proverb which says that traveling is beneficial to youth. Faith, you're right after all. Life is sweet, and that is the reason why I am not very anxious that you should take mine away. There remains, then, only the settlement of the 5 shillings a day. I am a little too parsimonious, am I not? But it is because I do not wish you to corrupt your keepers. Besides, you will still have your charms with which to seduce them. Try them if your failure as to Felton has not disgusted you with attempts of that kind. Felton has not spoken, said her ladyship to herself, so nothing is lost after all. And now, madam, farewell. Tomorrow I shall come and apprise you of the departure of my messenger. Lord de Winter arose, bowed sarcastically to her ladyship, and left the room. Her ladyship breathed again. She had yet 4 days before her, and 4 days would serve her to complete the seduction of Felton. And yet a terrible idea suggested itself to her mind. Perhaps Lord de Winter might send Felton himself to Buckingham with the warrant, and thus Felton would escape her, for to ensure her success it was necessary that the magic charm of her seduction should be undisturbed. Yet, as we have said, one thing reassured her. Felton had not spoken. She did not wish to appear disheartened by the threats of Lord de Winter. She therefore placed herself at table and ate. Then, as she had done the night before, she fell upon her knees and repeated her prayers aloud. And, as on the previous evening, the soldier ceased his beat and stood to listen. But she soon heard steps, lighter than those of the sentinel, approaching from the end of the corridor, and which ceased before her door. "It is he," she said, and she began the same religious strains which had so violently excited Felton on the previous evening. But although her soft, full, sonorous voice now thrilled more touchingly and more harmoniously than ever, the door continued closed. It did appear to her ladyship, in one of those furtive glances which she directed to the little wicket, that she could perceive through this close grating the ardent eyes of the young man, but whether this were a reality or a vision, he had at least sufficient self-control on this occasion to keep himself from coming in. Yet a few moments after the conclusion of her religious song, her ladyship fancied that she heard a deep sigh, and then the same steps that she had heard approaching retired slowly and, as it were, with reluctance.